Unhoused or homeless, which one am I? Is it one or the other? Can both words apply? I lived in a house, but never a home. And there is a difference when no love is shown. Being unhoused is factual, unloved, unnatural, homeless problems irrational, and things come undone. It's not the words which you use, it's not the structure you choose, it's the family you lose when unhoused and on the run. So now I have left that place where I stayed. There were no answers to pleas I had made. Now I'm unhoused and homeless, face a life of despair. And many like me crying life just ain't fair. So parents, kids need a home where they're loved and not alone. Try to set a new tone and let it ring loud. Please don't hesitate, and sooner than late, tell them how well they rate and make you so proud. So why do some struggle over which word is right? Both conditions are wrong when they make you uptight. Find the answers you seek through those you can trust. Seek the road you should follow and do what you must. Find the answers you seek through those you can trust. Find the road you must follow and do what is just.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ron Sticka. I'm the program director for today's program dealing with homelessness issues, specifically under the title Unhoused or Homeless, addressing walls, barriers, and better mental health needs in homeless communities. So we've had our first session just terminated, and this is the time to bring in a new panel to deal specifically with youth and homelessness issues, perhaps our most vulnerable portion of that population. So at this time, I'd like to bring in Michael Yoshioka, who is with St. Vincent de Paul in charge of the First Place Youth Center, and the youth house, the annex where homeless families are housed, and doing so much important work. And you've already heard kudos about the work St. Vincent de Paul does in our community. Next is Kirstin London, formerly with Looking Glass for a number of years, now director of Youth Era, and also an expert in my book on youth and homelessness issues. And Andrea Carranza, who I met through Hosea as a student, now graduated, but still remaining as a volunteer, or maybe you're actually employed, I'm not sure, but with Hosea Resource Center, dealing with homeless kids off the streets. They're actually not just teenagers or short of reaching adulthood. That particular foundation works with youth ages 16 through age 24. So welcome all. I think I've just highlighted this is a particularly vulnerable part of our population, usually driven out maybe because of abuse or other family situations that have forced them into an environment that would be best if they could have remained in a family and have the stability that many of us so much enjoyed when we were being raised. So Mike, I'm going to turn that over to you for opening, and then we'll follow with Kirstin, and then finally with Andrea on your observations about youth and homelessness in Lane County and in our communities.
Thank you, Ron, and good morning, everybody. And thank you to the amazing dialogue that happened in the previous panel. That was really thought-provoking, and I appreciate it. My name is Mike Yoshioka. I'm with St. Vincent de Paul. I'm the Director of Youth and Family Services. For those of you who do not know, the Youth and Family Services Department houses the First Place Family Center, which is the day shelter and access center for families who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. First Place Kids, which is our drop-in daycare, which provides therapeutic childcare for families, and as well as the Night Shelter Annex, which is our emergency shelter for unhoused families. And right now we're able to host up to 22 families at a time in a congregate setting and up to 6 families at a time in a non-congregate setting. And that program does entail intensive wraparound case management services for those families. And then what brings me mostly to this panel dialogue is the Girls Youth House, which is our transitional living program for youth age 16 to 18 who identify as female, who are either homeless or unaccompanied. And that also does entail intensive case management. And that's a program that can last up to 2 years for those youth that are enrolled in that program. I think the biggest takeaway that I want, or the biggest idea that I want this audience to take away today is that youth homelessness is really, and family homelessness has really been overlooked in the conventional approach to our county's homelessness problem. And that youth homelessness in particular is a very serious issue. Into the 2019-2020 school year, the Oregon Department of Education reported over 21,000 total unhoused students statewide, with over 1,500 of those youth living in shelters, over 15,000 of them in shared housing, over 2,500 unsheltered, and over 1,100 living in motels in Lane County. Our local schools reported over 2,200 students experiencing homelessness in the 2019-2020 school year. And Eugene and Springfield reported that over 1,500 students experienced homelessness for the same school year. 707 unaccompanied students were enrolled in Eugene 4th District School District, 356 unaccompanied students in Bethel, and 486 in the Springfield School Districts. The other point that I wanted to make that I think was touched on in the previous panel is that our current tools for assessing the level of homelessness outside of our school districts is inadequate, right? And so while we have some read on the level of homelessness being reported among youth, there's this, and well-warranted, outstanding anxiety that we are not wrapping our brains really fully around the true number of youth that are unaccompanied, experiencing actual homelessness, or are right on the verge of entering the homeless population. Why is it important to focus on youth homelessness? Youth experiencing homelessness have a lot of the same challenges and burdens that the rest of the homeless population have. But this is an upstream population if you want to look at it at the macro level. And so these are youth or individuals that are often experiencing their first episodes of homelessness. And if gone unaddressed, that episode can turn into multiple episodes and ultimately chronic homelessness that, if unaddressed at this upstream level, when we're addressing them as youth, can turn into an individual that's very difficult to access, difficult to provide services for, and is very expensive for our community to try to then transition somebody who's been chronically homeless into secure and stable housing. There's a few other points that I want to bring up as that relate to behavioral health that were touched on in the previous panel. And I'll just give some high level right now, because I know that the rest of our panelists are also going to touch on this, and I think that we'll have a great dialogue at the end of our hour here. But one thing that I'll just parrot from the previous conversation is that there's an urgent need for behavioral health services. In doing an initial survey of our homeless populations just within St. Vincent de Paul, we found that over 50% of our clients in our sheltered environments have a diagnosed behavioral health issue that requires treatment. Okay. And again, this is just those that are diagnosed and those that we know about and are able to be aware of, which leads again to that well-warranted anxiety that the number is probably much higher for those that we're working with. This last year did teach us one thing, is that when we do not have services on site and in staff, which means that the people that are engaging our clients in the shelter environment or in our transitional housing environments, when we don't have that available, it's very hard to make the service connection and get those participants to the relevant and critical services that they need in order to become more stabilized for their housing. And so that's the one big takeaway that we've had from the last year is that we need to have site-based, place-based behavioral health services in our service environments that are provided by core staff members who have already established a trusting relationship with these.
To what extent do we have those in place now?
In the shelter environment,
Correct.
It's non-existent.
Non-existent, okay.
We have great partnerships where we're able to partner with organizations like Willamette Family and bring in satellite offices and satellite services. But again, there's still a disjunct there, or a lack of meaningful connection that would otherwise happen if it was a staff person that was also providing them their meals.
Is that one of the goals at the youth house, to have that in place to a suitable level?
I'm glad you asked, Ron. It is one of our goals. And so one thing that we're endeavoring to do both within the Girls Youth House, but within St. Vincent de Paul as a whole, is go down that pathway of asking those questions of what does it look like for us to have clinicians on site and on staff? What does it look like for us to have traditional health workers on site and on staff? And what does it look like for us to have community health workers providing more general education and services on site and on staff? And what we're discovering is that it's a big process to become licensed in the training and the certification, and it pulls our whole operation into a much more rigorous standard of communicating, operating, training, and oversight, which we're happy to go down. And we're going down that pathway right now. And what we're discovering is that it does require a huge burden of ramp-up costs to get that infrastructure established and to invest in the year one to bring on and train and formalize other positions within our conventional operating model. And the good news, Ron, is that once established, it does bring in a new revenue stream for the emergency shelter environments, right, of Medicaid dollars, which does allow for the sustainability of on-site service provision. It's just a matter of what agencies that provide an emergency shelter have the capacity to absorb that ramp-up cost and sink that investment in the first 2 years of that model development. And there aren't any. And so that's one big ask that I have of this community is to, when we look at where support is needed, to be looking at ways that we can make that investment for our shelter providers to move in this direction with that venture capital, or whatever, however you want to frame it.
You know, Mike, one of the things you do through the youth house, which I think is important, is that it's designed so that the young females remain in school. One of the biggest problems in our communities are that we have high rates of dropout, and the kids just end up out on the streets. They're not getting educated, and that doesn't lead anywhere positive.
No, it doesn't.
So is that working pretty well with the youth house program to make sure the girls do stay in school and continue to improve themselves?
Yeah, it does. We've been able to make educational engagement. And I'm going to say that because a lot of us have a conventional idea of what school engagement looks like. And it looks like going back to high school and being on campus and graduating. And for a lot of our clients, it doesn't look that way. It can look like doing online courses, getting your GED, going to a vocational training program like WIOA, but still having movement in that investment in their development. And very frankly, investment in their ability to increase their income potential so that they can, when we're talking about those big goals about where do you want to live in 10 years? Do you want to be renting? Do you want to own a house? Do you want to have a family? And then do the great motivational interviewing to get them back to, well, what do you need to be doing tomorrow? Sometimes that's inappropriate for them to be going back to school in a high school environment. But we have a lot of other options that are available that still show, for most importantly, for the participant, a pathway to that broader goal. Does that answer your question, Ron?
It does, yeah. Any wrap up for you, Mike?
No, I would just put one more thing out there that, and Chris hit on it in the previous panel, that being trauma informed, while that is now a very popular buzzword, is critically important. And it's important for us as programmers that we ask it when we interview a new client, what does trauma-informed care mean to you? What does it look like? Or what would you think that looks like in our programming environments? But then also that we have very intentional and tangible training modules that are graduated for all staff that engage any client at any point around trauma-informed care. But that also when we look at our programming environments and our service environments, that we're looking at it through a trauma-informed lens, that even when you come through the door, before you even get to the door, how is that experience and how is that making us allowing, as was said before, to meet the participant where they're at, right?
And in essence, that means you understand their background and they become a partner in their own care and treatment and have a choice in their own direction, basically.
Yeah, and we understand and recognize that everyone has some form of trauma in their lives that might inhibit their ability to engage at the same level that we might otherwise expect them to, and that we need to bring our expectations down and modify our approach to them so that we can meet them where they're at and then gracefully connect them to the services that they need to be connected to. I'm not putting that very well, and Kirstin's going to put it better than I'm putting it right now.
All right, we may come back to you. Kirstin, I'm going to switch over to you now. You have 15 approximately years with Looking Glass, and I think our community is familiar with Looking Glass, but you probably had to look at trauma-informed care aspects of that, and you're now with Youth Era. So I'm going to turn it over to you to share a little bit of your experience and maybe share observations, what we need to be doing that maybe we're doing well, but need to do a lot more of.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, and before we start, I just wanted to let folks know that I am solo parenting a 4-year-old today, and so there might be some interruptions, and please forgive. Yeah, so
parenting well.
I have spent the last almost 2 decades working with runaway and homeless youth in Lane County. This is also a county that I had the opportunity to grow up in, and so I've been able to see how the county has changed its approach. And I don't just mean like Lane County government, but just as a whole has changed its approach to even identifying there being a need, all the way up to the current laws and current funding and kind of the world that we're working in with right now. So my experience, I have experience providing rental, housing assistant programming, shelter programming for youth 11 through 17, crisis lane management. I have experience working with students who are majority homeless and working to re-engage in the education system. I have host home experience, drop-in center experience in both rural and urban settings, street outreach in both rural and urban settings. And I definitely drafted up a whole spiel to go over, but I think I want to spend some of my time really addressing what I've heard other people say, and go back to what one of Mike's earlier comments on, this chronic homelessness, right? If we tackle it when they're young, then there's a long-term projected of moving them towards continued stability. And I think that's really true. I mean, I think that's where 15th Night was born, was this idea that, and what I've seen in my work is, if we can reunify at that first onset, so we're assuming that homelessness is for youth can look a lot of different ways. It can be family crisis and deciding to move out of the home, or it can be because the family is homeless as a whole family unit together. And so if it is because of that crisis, just a sorry. So if we can work towards that reunification very quickly, then we are going to really cut at the pass, this idea of moving into chronic homelessness. I've seen so many times where we have not engaged families enough at the beginning of the disruption to that family home life with having that young person move out. And so, the best example I can say is we see an increase of kids moving to the street at the beginning of the summer. There's a lot happening. You can camp, you can spend the night at your friend's house. It's great weather. It's like this continuous party. And then there's this group of kids that once the rain starts, they head back home. And it's not because, I want to be clear, it's not because they're necessarily just rebelling. It just is that they've deemed that home life is safer than what they're experiencing on street life, and more comfortable, and they're willing to put aside some of the issues that cause them to leave the home. And we've had families who've said at the beginning of the rainy season, when their young person tries to re-enter the home, no, everything's been great. We haven't had crisis. There's been no conflict. And so we're going to say, no, thank you. Our young person is now got to fend for themselves. And so just really wanted to touch on that. If we can really wrap our services around and figure out how to provide the best trauma-informed services at the onset for our young people, we're going to really help alleviate that chronic homelessness at the end of it. And then there was something else Mike said, Mike, you see your hands raised.
Yeah, go ahead and finish. I'll come back to it.
No, there was something you said, so I hope that I can wrap back around to it. But what I would say is, starting in 2004, when I started my work in RHY world, we really saw a lot of kids at the shelter who were coming because there was crisis going on at home. And that didn't mean that there wasn't addictions. That didn't mean that there wasn't financial stress. That didn't mean that there wasn't abuse happening. We just saw these kids coming and figuring out how to get their needs met with a lot less available in this community. What I would say is now what I see the work that we in the work that we're doing is that we see a lot more mental health following them. And it goes back to this need for, we need more residential services. We need more behavioral health services. I think for me, the true joy of watching Mike come into this community is he's brought that outside perspective, and he does do such a great job of saying at the county, we need more, and we can't just tokenize the work that we're doing, because I think that for so long, the work that we have been doing is checking off that box and saying, yes, we're serving youth, but are we serving them in the best ways that we possibly can? And just to give a landscape, because I'm on national advisory boards, I've done a trainings on national levels on this stuff, and Oregon is super unique in its approach to working with youth and young adults, especially in the runaway and homeless youth world. So just to lay it out there, our state law says it's not against the law to run away. Young people can start legally signing for themselves at the age of 14. So it's not against the law to run away, and it's not against the law to kick your young person out. You do have to provide that young person with a safe place to stay. So I know when I worked at Station 7, we always wanted us to be the safe place to stay, because it's better than in a car, or for some folks, it's better than randomly landing on somebody's couch. And then the state views the 16-year-old as capable of being an adult, capable of taking care of themselves. And the reason that I say that is that if a 16-year-old leaves home, we're much less likely to get 16-year-old support through, like, say, child welfare the older they are, because the state of Oregon really does see them as that capable age of taking care of themselves. And so there's a lot that's happening in youth and young adults' lives that's really not set up to serve them super well. So if you've got a 16-year-old who's left home, there's no other support that's really going to follow them after they leave home. They're eligible to sign for their own apartment, and yet we know that we're in a housing shortage. We were in a housing shortage long before we had wildfires that really created a housing shortage, and a construction shortage as well. And so the folks that we are working with are really struggling, like last in line to be the ones who are rented to. Oftentimes are competing with folks for jobs that folks who are more qualified are getting, so they're not getting the jobs that they need to be able to rent in this current rental market that we are experiencing, at least in the Eugene Springfield area. And they're being asked to walk their way through the world as an adult, or they have mental health stuff that really inhibits their ability to work. And they're being asked to walk their way through this world with as an adult, but the cards are stacked against them.
Kirstin, right there. One area I see as promising would be mentorship, and maybe multiple mentors per child. My question for you is, how accepting would they be or motivated to follow through to work with an adult who they feel might give them help? And are we doing enough of that sort of thing? And Mike, I see you had your hand up. But first, Kirstin, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's about finding the adults that really can fit into what we need them to be, right? So it's going back to that trauma-informed care conversation that we were having earlier, and realizing that our young people are in constant crisis, constantly trying to figure out how to navigate this world. They have shelter issues that pop up all the time. They have family issues that pop up all the time, and they're not going to be traditionally, they can't come to every appointment. They're not going to be on time. They're not going to present well polished and appreciative all the time. And so what we really need ideally that's what we're using peer support for. And I should probably plug my new agency, Yoshioka, because that's our whole shtick, is peer support and getting peer voice in systems of care. And we're also working on this fall, late fall, we will have a youth hostel up and running that will act like a warming center 365 days a year in the heart of downtown. So I've done my little spiel, thank you. Yeah. But like that idea that, it takes a long time. These folks are asked to tell their story, make appointments, come to things, meet us on our terms. And we don't actually hold that space really well for them. So realizing that it's not going to be pretty, they're going to miss appointments. They're probably going to tell you some choice words about something if you hit a nerve or they're not in the mood. And so we need mentors and volunteers and peer folks that do not take any of that personally and come back every single week and say, you're important enough for me to come back every single week, rather than saying, my personal need for filling my own cup in this is not being filled fast enough. And I don't know if Andrea and Mike have anything else that they would like to touch on on that.
I'm going to get to you in just a second, but Mike, you had something you wanted to offer?
Yeah, I want to make a distinction between mentors and peer support specialists. Yeah. And when I say peer support specialist, that is a formal and certified role, right? That if it's a youth peer support specialist, it's somebody that has lived experience as a youth, right? Similar to the population that they're aiming to serve, other youth experiencing homelessness. And that has standards. It also has revenue tied to it, Medicaid revenue tied to it. And so while mentorship and a lot of other great resources are out there, it's still critical to have a peer support specialist that can most appropriately meet the client where they're at and then bring them to that mentor and connect them to that mentor, or then bring them to that workforce development specialist.
Well, and I assume it's the peer support that is going to have the most immediate trust.
That's the idea. One other idea, and Andrea, I'm really sorry, I'm going to let you speak.
Go ahead.
Is that, and this is an idea that we can use some support from the PHB on, Chris and Brittany, but we're trying to work with our CCOs so that a peer support specialist can follow a youth across program environments, right? So if a relationship is established at, say, Station 7, but that youth needs to go to Youth Era or needs to go to the youth house or needs to go to other services, that individual person that they have a relationship with who is their youth specialist can also go there, and that the Medicaid revenue can follow them across and support those other programs serving them. There's some work that needs to be done at both the state and the local level to allow that, but that having that ability and that functionality would be critical. Thank you.
Exactly. Okay, Kirstin, was there anything else you wanted to say right now before I turn it over to Andrea?
I mean, I'm sure I have oodles of things to I will mute myself and just I'll get into listen mode.
Okay, we'll invite you back with further comments. Andrea, tell us a little bit about you, and let me just introduce you from the standpoint, you came into Hosea's part of your school studies at the University of Oregon, and we met that way, and I was doing a ukulele course there. I even persuaded you to come learn a little ukulele. So I think music programs and other options like that are part of what might motivate some of these people to take a second look at school. I have known of situations where kids in school would stay if art and music programs are available, but if those are taken away, then there's not as much motivation. So it's important to really develop the entire person. So anyway, what brought you into this field of working with homelessness, and what's it been like so far?
So hi, I started as an intern last January in 2020, so right before the pandemic started. And the way that Hosea flowed was it was open from 4:30 to 6:30, and it was just like a drop-in center, just a shower, a hot meal, a safe space for youth to come down. But now, because of COVID, we actually were able to expand our services and our hours. So now we're open 1 to 6:30 from Monday through Thursday. So now we serve lunch and dinner. They can come down, shower, do their laundry. We now have a nap room that they could safely take a nap and get some rest, and things like that. So I learned about Hosea through the Family and Human Services program at the University of Oregon. In my program, they really revamped it now. You had to do a practicum and like on-field hours. And Hosea was one of the first internships I did, and it was the first time I ever worked with the homeless population, and it was a very, very special and humbling and just passionate experience for me. I learned a lot just about the barriers that the youth go through, and they're my peers. So it was just very different learning about just the type of things that they go through and how early their trauma really does root from and how it really follows them just because it happens when their brain is developing. And of course, trauma is going to affect a child or a teenager, an adult, a youth, really anyone. But in those really critical ages and years, it really has followed them a lot. And I've learned a lot of stories, very different stories of how they've really ended up unhoused and how they've experienced homelessness, how long. And it all really is very different. It can root from their parents being abusive, their parents having an addictive problem with any drug or whatever. It could be the whole family experiencing homelessness and just being out on the street. It could be that.
Is it fair to say that those who patronize Hosea are looking for a safe space?
Yes, Hosea. So all the youth come down, and a lot of the times it is if they're at home and their home life isn't really the healthiest and they're almost at risk of just leaving their home, they will come down to Hosea to hang out with their friends, to use our TVs, our PlayStation, the computers, the pool table. It's a really nice way that the peers interact with themselves and support each other and kind of check in with each other on how they're doing, what they're doing, and just kind of taking each other in if one is having a really difficult time. And you can just, I learned a lot about the culture of the homeless population, specifically youth, of how they really build their own family within each other, of helping each other out. And so if one is really having a hard time or one is newly introduced into experiencing homelessness, one will take them under their wing and kind of show them the ropes, show them the resources that they have access to, the services, and a lot of things like that. Did that answer your question?
It does, and I don't know if you were there on March 9th at the start of the pandemic really having an impact, but I was there the night they had to shut that down in terms of actual visitation, and there was just a lot of shock.
Yeah, it was, and it was to the youth.
Fear of being put back out on the streets.
Yeah, most definitely.
So this safe space, I think, is an important concept with dealing with youth, that it's a service that we probably need a lot more of. Is that fair to say, that the more we can get people in that age range, 16 to 24, and maybe ages before that and ages after that, even as they're becoming young adults, it's so important to have spaces where they can feel safe and interact with positive influences in their lives. How much of a situation or problem is that with drug abuse and kids that show up high and things like that compared to when you're trying to deal with it?
Half of the clients that I would say the majority of them do have kind of will come intoxicated, do have a drug of choice that they choose to use regularly or consistently or whatever it may be. A lot of the kids do actually sober up, and they're on their road to sobriety and stuff. The youth that come down, a lot of them will kind of go to rehab and pop back in and kind of show their peers that they're clean and sober now, and kind of giving them that example and kind of just that a bit of encouragement, like, I did it and we can all do it, and just having that flow and environment there. Of just like also one of our new staff members was a youth that was on the streets and used Hosea, and she's now clean and sober and everything. And she's one of the success stories, most definitely, from Hosea. And it's just really nice having just that person and that lived experience down there, that she was once there and was the youth using all the services, and it really helped her in life. And we've seen so many success stories. I've witnessed a couple myself just being there, and it's just an amazing thing of how Hosea is really just a safe space for them.
Well, I work with PTSD issues primarily, and that's rampant in the homeless and unhoused communities, as it is with just about any facet of our population. But I've always thought it would be good to engage people having those kinds of issues to not just help themselves, but find they can get to a point where they help others, which is really what the peer support aspect is, that they have a certain trustworthiness by having been there. And I know Hosea organizes certain activities which help the people that you serve bond with each other and find things in common. So what kind, just briefly, what kind of activities does Hosea help? I know you do rafting trips and things like that.
Yes, yes. We do that, the rafting trips and stuff. And we also we get like donations from vans a lot of the time. So we'll have just like blank white vans, and we'll have like art days where the youth will come down and they will be able to, they design their own shoes. So we do a lot of like art stuff. We do a lot of arts and crafts or like games, raffles, kind of things where it's really just like a nice environment for them that they probably weren't really able to experience growing up, especially if they maybe didn't make it all the way through school, where you kind of do those kind of school activities and stuff. So that was one of my big roles at the time. And backing back to the point of peer support specialists, Hosea recently is now having direction services from Springfield, and we have about 4 peer support specialists now coming to almost every day that we're open, and they're now, it's testing. It's been the first week where they will now be able to really get to know the youth and kind of pick one, not necessarily pick one, but build a relationship with the youth that, you know, will be willing to kind of open up, trust them and stuff, because that's one thing that roots a lot from their trauma, is really not opening up to, you know, adults, authority, or other organizations, doctors, really anyone. It could be really hard for them. And that's one of the things that now Hosea, since we don't have all the services, but we're now trying to bring in services from the community and different agencies that they'll be able to offer, are equipped and qualified for.
It appears to me Hosea is in a growing mode, and I know housing up to, I think, 30 units is in the cards for the future. So at least there's some progress that's being made. Mike, I think I saw your hand up a little bit ago. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, the points made by Andrea are excellent, and thank you. I just can't hammer this home enough. Peer support specialists are critical. The ability to have peer support specialists on staff, having a employee as a staff member who was a former client and now helping other youth is a beautiful thing. It's even better if they're on your staff and going through a peer support training and certification on staff. We don't have a formalized pipelines like that right now, and there's a significant labor force deficiency for social service providers in our community. It's very hard to hire right now qualified people. And if we made the investment for individual organizations to be able to train up under a peer support specialist model and certification, we would create that pipeline to have the quality people with those lived experiences to get the structure and meaningful trainings that they need to be effective in their roles and to better support our agencies as we support this community. I'm going to go on one more tangent.
Go ahead.
Okay. The other thing that and this is for Chris and Brittany, one thing that we need to do, and it's the most depressing thing you can hear when serving a client at the youth house or at Station 7, or when we get somebody at the youth house and they're like, oh yeah, I know about St. Vincent de Paul. I went to First Place Family Center when I was a kid. Or I stayed in the night shelter when I was a kid, right? Because that definitely indicates to us generational poverty and generational homelessness. And we as a continuum of care and as a county, we do not have our arms or our tight grip on the data that tells us how serious this intergenerational poverty and homelessness is in our community. But we have the numbers. We've been operating the HMIS system for a long enough period of time to where we can do a longitudinal analysis and start to measure the people that experienced homelessness as a minor that are coming back into the adult population. And my guess is that's going to be very compelling data that are going to really force the county to say, we need to address youth when they're minors in a household and when they're transitional age. Thanks, Rob.
And just to summarize that from my perspective, we need to be proactive on these issues, as with any problems, try to prevent the major problems from arising in the first place, because once it's damaged goods, and I've seen a lot of young people that have been very damaged, it's so much harder to bring them back to a level of normalcy. So be proactive, not reactive. Peer support is a great program. We're going to talk about that also on the veteran side of things. And Kirstin, let me throw it back to you if you're available right now. Is there anything else you see that we should be doing more of, planning for the future? I know I talk to youth, that they should maybe look at mental health as a field that they would be good in. That they're already so motivated to try to help other people in many cases.
I think just to kind of mirror off of what Mike was saying, and I'm sure Chris would say this as well, is that we need to do more work around yes, I think the field needs more peer support. I think the field needs people with more lived experience, but until the pay can somehow increase with the cost of living in our environment, that's the real kicker, is that people are not able to survive on $13 an hour or $15 an hour. I know. So what I'm doing at Youth Era is just the larger conversation that Megan Schultz with 15th Night really got going about using the pods to fill that service gap. And I know we were talking about paying folks $16 to $17 an hour, which 3 years ago was like, wow, so much money, when rents were a lot cheaper. And I know that recently I saw that somebody at Carl Jr. can make $16 an hour. So when our staff can qualify for the services like SNAP and Section 8 housing, because they're making so little, I think that does not help us increase the number of folks looking to get into our fields. So I think whatever we can do in terms of talking to legislators or really advocating for that cost of living increase, and our funders, right? I've operated HHS funding for almost 2 decades, and I've never seen the maximum ceiling of those grant awards rise. The work that we're required to do has increased, but that maximum ceiling has not. And so I think that it's always that constant scramble. And the other thing is, we have done some systems work. I saw that Susie put that 15th Night just released a report out, and that is true. We've also at the county level and on in a subcommittee on the PHB have done some service gap look, and we know that there are lots of service gaps needs. I would say detox treatment for youth and young adults is a huge gap. The state of Oregon is not willing to license detox for young folks, but we're missing services that we need to really look at to fill that piece of the puzzle. And, Mike was talking about peer supports following folks, 100%, that's great, but there are just services that we need. Station 7 right now is serving 8 because of COVID. Jordan Shin said something in the chat too, Ron, if you could get to that. But and it's licensed for 12, and we're going to have 20 at the youth hostel downtown. There are not just 32 kids who are in need of shelter.
And the same thing at St. Vincent de Paul Youth House. That's 13 girls maximum in that one facility. I know you have plans to increase that, which I think would be a very positive development. That's going to take time and effort. So it's really a triage system. And
I would say, let's all be prepped that when this eviction moratorium ends, and I have not followed enough, I know the federal one has been extended and state of Oregon is due to end next week, that our unhoused numbers are going to increase. The need for our services are going to increase. I think I hear a lot of, why is the homelessness problem so bad in this community? And I have a myriad of answers I can give for that. But one of the first things I say is, let's prepare for it to get worse.
Yeah. Gosh, let me just going up, Mike.
I think one important thing, I'm hearing a lot of different things. We need to go down this pathway where providers are able to bill for Medicaid, and when that revenue goes in to support those agencies, and so we're developing our workforce. It's a huge hurdle, right? And so we will need some startup funds. We're working on creating the model, and we've invested over $200,000 in the last year to create the model and to test it to make sure that it is feasible and it is self-sustaining. That allows to raise wages, it allows to provide more on-site and better services. And then once we have that model created, we want to be able to mentor, incubate, and financially support our community partners to also
this is the way the community invests in the future with tangible results when you can create positivity among the youth community where things get better and better, hopefully.
Yeah. It is cheaper for us to get ahead of our youth than it is for them to continue, like Mike was saying at the beginning, to continue on into homelessness and to adults. So if we can somehow figure out a price tag and sell that to the community, I think that's key. And saying, listen, if we're providing all these services for youth, this is actually saving the community this much money in the long term. The hard part is like defining what that is and putting a number to that. Yeah.
I've got a comment here though on our chat about barriers to getting things done. We all know about that.
Jordan is right. Jordan is saying that the Medicaid stuff is a lot, and we're losing therapists in droves to private practice where they can make more money and they don't have to deal with the bureaucracy. And then we have family. I dealt with a family a few weeks ago, and mom said, I can't find anybody to take my insurance. I can't get my kid out of a residential treatment program and bring him home until I do that. And all this, and I came out and, oh, what about this? What about that? She's like, try that. People are waiting months and months and months to get the mental health stuff they need right now. And it's just.
Well, it's frustrating. This is where I think some mentorship and just get the guidance or centers, which is sort of what 15th Night is. I was going to have you explain that a little bit to try to get some efficiency in the structure. So there's a path that can be followed. So Kirstin, do you want to just briefly tell for our viewers what 15th Night does that's so valuable to our community?
Yeah, I mean, I think 15th Night stemmed from conversations years ago about how we can wrap services around youth who are just on the verge of experiencing homelessness so that we stop them from moving into chronic homelessness. It's morphed into the Youth Advisory Council that's super active, engaged in systems, and provides leadership opportunities. They really are, the youth really do lead the YAC in the direction that they're going into. It's increased services and basic needs support in schools, so that I know that in one school they just opened up laundry services for students who might need it. The Rapid Access Network is really what they're famous for, and they're starting to pilot into other communities, which is this idea that a student comes to somebody, or I guess any of us can say, we have this person with this need. We send out a text alert that goes out to the Rapid Access Network that says that the identified need, and then, I mean, I think 90% of the time that need is filled within the hour, if not by the end of the day of, yep, I've got a tent, I will get it over here.
Yeah.
How do we?
Yeah, the concern is for quick action to rescue young teens that are out there because some, quite frankly, disappear with human trafficking or otherwise. And the thinking is if a child is not rescued within 14 days of them being out on the streets, it may be a critical time period lost.
Yeah, Ron, I was the one that brought that up, and that's where 15th Night came from. And that was definitely an observation I did want to touch, because one of the things that I'm most proud that I've done in this county is getting a CSEC, so the Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children, sex trafficking specialist employed, and Youth Era also sits on this, and we would love to see some other folks around the table. We have a multidisciplinary team that is certified by the DOJ at the state level, where we meet, we work with the FBI, the state attorney's office, the DA's office, local law enforcement, victim services to really talk about what's happening in this community, because you are 100% right. We have young people that there's nobody in their family of origin that's looking for them, and they are primed to go missing, and nobody would know. I mean, we have kids who we just one day walk away and we never hear from again. And so I think what's so great about this Rapid Access Network and the work that we're all doing is that we actually see people. We notice when they're gone. We ask them to check in. We do safety plans with them. And it's vitally important to the work that we do.
I'm about to go into the closing comments. If there are any of our audience that have questions, go to your chat and make sure it's a message to everyone so they can all see that. I'll give you a minute to get that done. Mike, any closing comments?
No, this is the beginning of a conversation, and so I'll throw my email into the chat. This is the start of many conversations, and so I invite people to reach back out.
And that's one of the values. We get people together, have a lot of knowledge and experience, and take some time to share it with others. Andrea, anything for you right now? You've got a long future ahead of you. And
I think that connecting back to what Brittany and Mike and really everyone has really been talking about is working together as a community to really like tackle down this crisis that's been just growing and growing. And just across, like on the West Coast, we have a pretty bad problem, but in Eugene, I think it's like the biggest per capita in like the country of the homelessness and everything. And it's pretty prevalent, the crisis that's going on, and just really working together and connecting with other agencies and just filling in gaps that maybe one agency or one organization doesn't offer, but then connecting with another one that does offer that and offers a little bit more to really be able to kind of more individualized care rather than having just a really stagnant, broad assessment or plan that we really...
Yeah. I believe Eugene is in the top 10, maybe the top 5 with homelessness issues in terms of per capita rates.
I want to tackle that a little bit because I think people say, oh my gosh, Eugene Springfield makes it so easy for somebody to be homeless and we're getting all these people moving here. And yeah, I've seen people come at the beginning of the summer and say, this is it. This is where I'm going to be. I'm going to land. And then the rainy season starts and they say, nope, I am going home. What the hell is this? And so I want to say what we do well is identify service gaps, have these conversations. I think we're counting, we're looking, and we are okay with the fact that homelessness is not hidden. I wouldn't say, Chris has something to say too, as I knew he would. I wouldn't say it, I just think it's about how people count. When I go into communities and rural superintendents are telling me that they don't have homeless students, I don't buy it. I just think that maybe they're not looking. And so I think Eugene does a really good job at counting. I think I just struggle because I think we get tagged with this, we've let homelessness get out of control, but I think we are treating people as people rather than pushing them to the outskirts. It's hard.
And building off of that, it's actually really a lot of youth that I've met at Hosea that come from different states really gravitate towards Eugene because of the support and services that Eugene and Lane County have to offer for the youth or just people experiencing homelessness all around. And it's not kind of enabling it. If anything, we're just giving them the support, the tools and the resources that they need to get off the streets and prevent chronic homelessness. And just like learning that through experiences and just hands-on with the youth, it's a very prominent thing.
I have a question from Chris McAllister. What would you say now that we have that wasn't around 10 years ago for youth? I think we're making improvements, right? And we've sort of talked about it's a drop in the bucket, but are things better off now than they were 10 years ago?
I mean, 100%. We're just having conversations that we weren't having 10 years ago. We're bringing in ideas from different communities. We're addressing service gap needs. I think 10 years ago, kids were seen as the issue, just the issue. It was never seen as a family dynamic issue. It was a kid being a rebel, being on the streets. And now we are acknowledging trauma and we're acknowledging environment and we're acknowledging, school stuff. There's so much work to be done, but I think that we just talk about it a lot differently.
Anyone else have an answer to that? Mike, you're a new arrival, but you were in San Francisco. How does Eugene compare with San Francisco?
I think Eugene's doing great. And I think, well, I wasn't working directly in homeless services, but I know that there's a lot of models that our community has established that have been replicated. And so I think that there's two great advantages that we have here. One is that we have great talent. We've got folks that have invested their whole careers in this community. And the other is that the rest of the nation does have an eye on how we're going to move right now. And so we have an opportunity to be very creative and innovative in setting a model, knowing that it will ripple and permeate other communities well beyond our local scope. And so it's also a burden. So it means that we're challenged here to really step up to the plate, knowing that the impact will go far beyond our local community.
Okay, well, we've had lots of good comments. Andrea, I'm going to put you on hold since 10 years ago you weren't old enough to really try a comparison. So in 10 more years, we'll ask for a comparative from you on how things have improved, or hopefully have improved. All right, I want to thank our panelists at this time. We're pretty much staying on time, and that's good. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, Kirstin. Thank you, Andrea, for being an outstanding panel. And I'm sure our viewers will appreciate that too.